are in a collective space between stories. Systems are crumbling, whether or not you're choosing to see them. Democracy, healthcare systems, it's just all of this stuff is starting to shift and transform, but it hasn't been rebuilt.
Welcome to Secret Ops, the podcast uncovering the world of operations, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Ariana Cafone, and today's guest is Allie Stark, co-founder of Noria, which is a learning and development platform that provides online courses and community for living in the new era of leading. Now, Allie has been in the health and wellness space for over 15 years, and what she specializes in is working with entrepreneurs and leaders to be able to essentially bridge their personal principles with their company values and how to make those work together. We dive into what it was like creating a board certified health and wellness coaching program for One Medical, but we also talk about what is going on in the world today and how do we navigate that as individuals and as people within the business world. It was such a pleasure talking to her, and I hope you find it as informative as I did. Let's jump in. Allie, welcome to Secret Ops. Today, I was especially pumped because I feel like I've been stuck in the world of data and AI and technology. And we're going to talk about the more holistic side of business, which is the undercurrent of everything that's happening, but we can't quite articulate it sometimes. So to kick off, what have you been seeing? Because I've been seeing a lot of burnout and malaise, and I've been feeling it in myself. But in your experience, what's going on with business owners? What's happening in the world?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me, Ariana. It's a treat to be here. And it's such a juicy question to start this conversation. And, I don't really feel like I have any specific answers. I have more questions and curiosities than anything. But I think that in my observation, what I'm really experiencing is that we are in a collective space between stories. So let me make this more individual. So let's say you're going through a big life transition. You're getting married, you're moving cities, you're changing jobs, you get a divorce, whatever it may be. There's normally what happens is there's the end of the first story and then that blank page space before the next chapter begins. And this is actually a concept that comes from a writer and a philosopher and a teacher named Charles Eisenstein. And what he's speaking about is that there's this space that exists between stories, but because of our culture, which is to move on, to get on to the next, to not take a moment to pause, there's an anxiety and a control that I think shows up about us moving into the next space. And so I think what you're talking about, the burnout, the malaise, which are omnipresent, the lack of motivation, the confusion that's arising, is because we're actually in a collective space between stories. Systems are crumbling, whether or not you're choosing to see them. Democracy, healthcare systems, it's just all of this stuff is starting to shift and transform, but it hasn't been rebuilt. It's like the buildings have to be raised before they get rebuilt. And so kind of it's like both in its simplest form and it's also very nuanced and complex. I think we're in the chasm that lives between two worlds. And what lives in those spaces are exhaustion and feeling shut down and not knowing and having to really sit with uncertainty. And I think as a business owner and in a capitalistic society where you have to make money, that's it's a very confusing place to be. And, I was just reading through a couple of Substacks that I got. And so many of them are like, are your old marketing techniques not working anymore? Is this the slowest season you've ever had in your entire career? And I think we're all feeling that because we don't know what to do, where to spend, where to place our time or attention. So, we could go 1,000 different directions on this topic, but I'll at least pause there.
I have never heard it framed in that way. And I now understand why we are all very confused. Because we do not have that North Star motivation of what we're running towards. If we even go back a decade plus, apps and fundraising and startups and technology, there was this renaissance that was happening in that space. And everybody felt quite clear on here's the calculations on how you get successful. But then 2020 happens. Now AI is coming. And overall, we are just trying to figure out what should we care about? What does success look like? How do we run our businesses? Do we even care about running businesses? I mean, of course, we're in a capitalist society. But again, these are the questions that I find a lot of people asking themselves. Do you find, I'm a millennial. We've been sprinting for a while now. We've been really running at things for a while. Do you find that like the midlife crisis is even a thing anymore? Is there just like a collective crisis that's sort of happening?
I'm just laughing because you sound like myself speaking out loud. So, yes, I definitely feel like millennials specifically have been raised in their professional, like young adulthood into adulthood with hustle culture, move fast and break things, busyness as a virtue, constant productivity. And
Mm.
then all of the technology sort of enhances those things. And the pandemic accelerated that as well. Um, it's been cool because throughout my career, I tend to work with clients oftentimes. This isn't, let's say this is 70% of the case. I tend to work with clients that are around my age. And so what I coached to in my 20s looks so different than what I'm coaching to now in my almost 40s. And I do think that there is this feeling of a midlife crisis, but it feels like how it's presenting is so different. It's not like someone's buying a sports car or cheating on their partner per se, where it's almost like acting out. I think that many millennials are highly aware, very therapized individuals,
Yes.
and I think that the midlife crisis looks like a crisis of culture. It's like this pace that we're operating at is unsustainable. A lot of stuff that's showing up in the zeitgeist right now are terms like downshifting,
Mm.
deaccelerate. Like rather than attending an accelerator, attending a deaccelerator. And so I think it's this desire to want to slow things down, and I'm not saying slow things down and therefore you're not productive or things are not getting taken care of, but just returning to this place of sustainability and where I actually feel lit up and creative and joyful, which I need space to do that. And so I feel like the midlife crisis looks like, it almost feels like a returning to the past, and it feels very counterculture to where culture is headed. And it feels messy. It feels like this super messy middle because I think, to your point, we don't really have a North Star. It's hard to know what to care about. There's so much noise.
Now, let's bring to life what you do. Obviously, I could talk about this stuff all day because it's everywhere, but we aren't talking about it. So I could
Yeah.
just like ask you a million questions. Getting into health and wellness within the business context has been your thread. Why? Why did you see this as something to care about, so many years ago? And how did that start to manifest in your own business?
I feel like I was a really highly sensitive little kid. And at that point in time, it was a way less noisy culture, but I was a highly sensitive kid. And I actually found yoga at a really young age. And I started teaching when I was probably 15 years old. And I think I would never have had the words to describe it at the time, but there was something about how yoga regulated my nervous system that
Mm.
allowed me to feel more at ease in a noisy world. And at the time, yoga was not hot and didn't involve weights and like loud music and all of the things. It's now shifted a little bit. But so I kind of brought that into young adulthood, and then I wound up getting really sick. So I had a few like pretty severe undiagnosed autoimmune illnesses in my early 20s. And I was really struggling to find answers in Western medicine. I felt like really I actually feel so grateful now, 20 years later, that I had that experience so young, because there's a real fall of grace when you have an experience with the healthcare system and it fails you. And what that wound up doing is leading me to a master's degree in integrative health. And I really loved the intersectionality of mind, body, spirit, environment. It just made a lot of sense to me. And at the time, there was a health coaching certification built into it. So I feel like one of those really lucky people where I found my path, but my path found me. So it started coaching in health and wellness. It moved into life coaching because I felt like your body keeps the score as a symptom of deeper stuff that's going on, which is typically related to values, relationship, purpose, meaning. And then as my career transitioned and shifted, and I was moving more into growing a business and entrepreneurship and leadership, I feel like the same type of people were being attracted to me to help coach them in growing their own businesses and working through leadership skills and really being connected to their heart um, throughout that process. So that was sort of the trajectory of how I got into the work that I do now.
I feel like we might be living parallel lives. I what is happening? So when I have actually never spoken about this. When I was in my late 20s, I was also diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and it was incredibly humbling because you're right. I realized how broken our medical care system was at its, and you always realize it at the time when you need it the most, and it
Yep.
is incredibly humbling, really disheartening, very emotional. And then, the after effects, once you stabilize how you are feeling physically, you've got to figure out how to layer that work in. Like, I was in my late 20s. I've got decades of years of work to go. And this is when, this is when I would say I denied it for like a good 5 years, where I said, okay, I'll hack, like, I'm fine. I'm going to hack this. I'm just going to ignore it. We're going to like go on with how I've been living my life. And that was such a mistake. Like you said, the body keeps the score, it catches up to you. I think everybody realizes that at some age. Some people, fortunately, don't have to experience that until they're much, much older. Some people have to experience it when they're, single digits old. Either way, you have that light bulb moment that says, I have to care about this. I can't ignore it anymore.
When you deal with illness, a veil gets lifted where you stop seeing certain things through rose colored glasses. At least that was my own experience and is oftentimes the experience of someone who's been failed by a system. And to go back to like, what is the collective moment that we're in? I think so many veils are being lifted and we're all having a bit of this oh shit moment. Like, what was promised to us isn't becoming reality. There's a little bit of like, what's true and what's real.
When do you usually start working with people? At that moment of the, oh shit, this is a crisis, or I feel yucky, I'm not quite sure what to do? Like, when do you tend to start working with people?
In the initial part of my career as a coach, people would come kind of in a health crisis. I have team members and coaches that still work in that space with people that are dealing with more chronic health, chronic autoimmune stuff. I don't mean to gender autoimmune conditions, but it oftentimes is very high achieving women, which that could be a whole other topic of conversation.
Hmm. I don't
Um,
relate to that whatsoever.
yeah,
No, not at all.
me neither. Me neither. Very ambitious, driven women. Um, I find that now, I really like bridging spirituality and strategy into the mix. I find that most of the people that I'm working with at this point in time, they've already opened the door of Pandora's spiritual box. Generally speaking, it's not in an oh shit moment. It's typically in a something even deeper than what the oh shit moment is coming up. And I want guidance and community and support around this.
So, when you're working with clients, what are you working with them to build or clarify? Like, what are some of the concrete deliverables that are happening, or, touch bases that are going on?
So it's really multifaceted. So let's just keep it in the camp of leaders and entrepreneurs and business owners. And it can go so many different ways. So it can be building and scaling their business by stacking them with people or automation or platforms that help with systemization and operational techniques, building an advisory board, staffing them with the right fractional people, something like what you do. creating onboarding materials, going through branding assets. My undergrad was in graphic design. So it's like going, doing creative direction and really thinking through what is the message that they're trying to get across and how does that connect to a deeper, more personal, more vulnerable story within. So we kind of cross over in this coaching and consulting space. And so much of it is very strategic and very tangible. It's looking through a P&L spreadsheet. It's, setting quarterly or annual goals. But there's also this kind of underlying piece that is tapping into the stuff that may get in the way. So what coaching does and really what I think we excel at is bridging from that awareness into an actionable space. And the action is, I'm sure what so many of your peeps are that are listening, are so skilled in. It's the systems, the operations, organization, staffing, onboarding, leadership skills, um, having a brand that looks beautiful. I'm someone that
Mm,
cares about beauty, so I think that really matters. Purpose and meaning, all that sort of stuff.
that makes sense. And for operators, a lot of what we do, it does feel like operational therapy, like
Yeah.
we come into a business and we're trying to fix the people, process, and technologies and how they're working together. But let's be real, ultimately all of that comes down to the people part. That is the hardest, stickiest part of the process because every company has a different culture. If we think about global businesses, that's a whole other layer to the pie of trying to figure out how all of that works together. But ultimately, that's not our job. Like, our job is to figure out how to create an operationally structured business.
Well, and Ariana, I have grown such an enormous amount of respect for operations people over the last few years as my business has grown and scaled. And because I'm an excellent, I'm really in that CEO space. So visionary, creative thinking, pie in the sky, excellent with people, all that sort of stuff. And what I've learned is, hiring a fractional CEO myself, when you guys are doing your job well, the work is invisible, actually. You don't even know it's happening. And so that's been such a learning curve for me of like, oh my god, it's operating so well because this is has become this well-oiled machine and that person is skilled enough in the platforms, the technology, how things communicate with one another that I don't even know it's happening. And I don't know, I just have found that to be so rad in like learning more because it's not my like ops specifically is not my zone of genius, but I feel like I'm really good at knowing kind of how to create intersectionality between the ops person, the finance person, the CEO type personality, all that sort of stuff.
No, it's true. And I do find, in the yin to the yang, I am that COO, I am that operator. But I really need those creative people that are thinking outside of the box, that are dreaming of things that, can we stretch this to a place where we never thought it was before? The best part of my job is when you sort of run through the standard way of how we operationalize a business, and then we can start having fun. And then we can take all of those things that are super delicious and the things that you want to experiment with as a founder and a CEO, and we can start to then challenge ourselves as operators to say, how the heck are we going to do that? And I think this ties into where you are today with the business. And in 2023, you created a board certified health and wellness program for One Medical that was acquired by Amazon in 2023. What was it like making that? What were the challenges? And then how did that springboard into Noria and what you're doing today?
So I started to build that program. It was kind of like it I think went live in 2023, but we probably spent 18 months building it. It was sort of like peak pandemic. And at the time, One Medical is a boutique primary care institution that has now been bought by Amazon. So it's in a massive transition at this point. But the woman that I co founded it with, we went to grad school together. And what healthcare needs is behavioral support. And that's what a health and wellness coach does. It's like, cool, I need to change my diet. That's great. But how do I actually do that? And coaching someone to change behaviors is complicated.
Mm,
It's like, again, coaching someone into awareness is one thing. Then having them shift from awareness into action is a very, very different thing. And that's what we're really skilled at doing. So we created a program that we then trained primary care practitioners and doctors and nurses to actually take on the hat of health and wellness coach in a primary care institution. And as we were building this, it was like the world was crumbling. We were deep in the pandemic. It was like everything was shattering around us. And so there was an impetus of like, how do you be a leader in a new era of work? And again, I don't think what that new era is defined yet. Like we haven't totally defined it yet. But that was the creation of Noria. So my co-founder and I developed. It's an online asynchronous learning program that has a live component to it, where you're really taking an inside out approach to leadership and learning skills of how to manage and resource your own energy first. So we get a lot into nervous system regulation and self-awareness, etc, and then how you take that out into the different layers of a business, the environments that you're building, one-on-one conversations, a culture of belonging, meaning and purpose. And I think that you asked me this question previously about what is regenerative leadership, and it's similar to regenerative business. If we want to create something that is like a self fulfilling cycle, so the meaning of why we called the company Noria is that Norias are these ancient water wheels that helped to lift up water from a river or a waterbed bank in a local community. It would feed the surrounding community so that the community was nourished to take care of the land. So it was this regenerative cycle. And that's really how we look at the business. We are teaching, we are the Noria for the people that participate in our programs, so that you, as a leader, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a manager, very lonely, high stress, high demand positions, can feel resourced energetically to go be of support to the community that you are in service to. And, without sounding lofty, it's like that's how we change the world. It's not in these big ways, it's in these tiny aspects of what's within our locus of control.
Mm. There's, it's interesting because they talk about, putting your own mask on first before you like put a child's mask on when you're in an
Yep.
airplane, or just essentially having that moment where you fill your cup before you're able to fill anyone else's cup. It makes total sense. But how to do it is a different thing. And we were discussing, so I'm a new parent right now, 4 months into it. And my God, my cup is like so empty and I have such a chill baby. But it's amazing how once I added the work part of my life back into it, and again, I'm very privileged to work remotely. I have my own business so I can set my hours, right? I have all of the advantages in the world, but I still struggle to fill my cup at the end of the day and figure out how to do that in order to give back to people. How long do you think it takes people to figure out that process? Like, can we, in true Type A fashion, like, can we put a time frame on this? But seriously, is it like, do you think that people, is it different for everybody? Meaning, to fill your cup looks different from someone else's, or are there principles that are more collective in how to be able to do that?
There's a couple of articles that have been circulating recently by, it's like the US Department of Health. Her name is Vivek Murphy. I may have butchered it a little bit. And the whole title of the article is something like "Parents Are Not All Right." And that we've reached a level, and this is speaking about American culture. We've reached this level of intensive parenting, and I am not a parent yet. I'm currently pregnant, so I haven't experienced it firsthand. But we've reached this level of, it's a combination of parenting, the cost of living, the expectations and demands that are on all of us to, like, it's very hard to have a single income household at this point in time. Um, and I think we've kind of reached this critical mass. And I don't feel like I haven't observed, and it will be intriguing for me when I'm actually in the experience of it. I don't have a ton of examples of parents who work who are not drowning a little bit, something's going to have to get simplified in order for us to feel sustained. And it's really hard to simplify when you're managing a business and childcare and wanting friendships and wanting to have a relationship with your partner and wanting time for yourself. It's like you just can't do it all at once. You can't. So, um, I wish I had a better answer, but I would say like yes, there are small daily things you can do. I mean, on its in its most basic form, simplifying what you can, slowing things down, breathing to regulate your nervous system, um, ensuring that you have like intimate community and friends that you can kind of share in the experience with. All of that stuff matters. And I think that there's a larger crisis that's taking place right now. And I think we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage it. And it's like cuz the things I would fall back on are just they're simple self-care practices, but when you're strapped for time, which everyone is, what do you do?
It's such a good point. A book that really echoed with me many years ago was it's a book called The One Thing, where essentially what you're trying to do is get down to the essence of what you want to do. And then you boil down your days to driving that one thing forward. And it was really helpful because of course I was doing a million things at the time, too many things. And I feel like now looking at that book and that message, you're never going to boil it down to one thing, right? Like it's really impossible. But in working to simplify what your motivations and what your time is being driven by, that is the ultimate experience and practice, right? Like today, what what does today look like for me? How am I going to get through today with a 4-month-old and a business and recording and all these things? Like what does today look like and what do I want my priorities to be? What would be the one daily thing that people can do to recenter their focus to align with their wellness? Like, what would be the one tiny actionable thing that they can do tomorrow?
So I think to your point where there's so much uncertainty right now, there's so much unknown, there's so much overwhelm. The easy place to go, maybe it's not the easy place to go, but kind of the natural place we've been trained to go is to problem solve. And I think instead of going there, get curious, right? So just start to ask yourself, like, wow, I'm feeling anxious today. I wonder what that's about. Okay, and like let's go a little like let me keep getting curious. Like can there be excitement almost in the curiosity rather than that grasping fear that shows up and your breath, taking just a few really deep cleansing breaths to really tap into nervous system regulation, to slow yourself down, to slow your thoughts down are going to help you actually access some of that curiosity. And I'm just thinking of mentors and teachers in my life who are much, much older than I am. And, they're at points in their life where, like, when stuff is uncomfortable, the place that they go is just delight and curiosity. Like, I wonder where this is going to go. And there is a part of that that's creating some neuroplasticity, right? It's shifting the way in which your brain is orienting towards fear, grasp, scarcity, all of the sorts of things that actually increase the way you're feeling. And so I think, that restoring of equilibrium and ease is about curiosity.
And I'm gonna just drive that point home with a personal experience from today. I was so anxious this morning. I don't know why. I had a pretty chill morning. I had to go to the doctor's over a little bit, but I was feeling this level of anxiety, and I ignored it for like a good 2 hours. And guess what happened? It just got worse, and just like, and then I was like, I'll drink some coffee, and then guess what? It got even worse, and it got to the point. It got to the point that I had to stop and I had to say to myself, what is going on, Ariana? Like, what is happening inside? And it turns out I was just really nervous for this interview. I hadn't met you. I really was excited about this topic, but I was just mentally sort of preparing for it and in just like slowing down and then also saying, okay, what's the worst case? So like maybe I'll fall on my face. Maybe Allie will think I'm a dork. I don't know. Whatever it may be, I started to really breathe through it and think through it and slow down But now I'm here. And guess what? The anxiety's gone away. I feel much more centered and calm in my day. And I do think it started with me just slowing down, taking a breath, and saying, what's going on? And then the other part solved by spending time with you and getting to know you and your world. And I really do want to thank you so much for coming on to Secret Ops. Now, before we wrap up, though, we have to get to know you as a human a little bit more. So I've got a couple of rapid fire questions just to get to know you. And then we'll make sure that we leave listeners with a bit about where we should point them to if they're interested in learning more. So a couple of quick rapid fire questions, first one is, what is the favorite part of your day?
Probably after work. I am married to someone who's like allergic to indoors. It's his greatest superpower. And I feel like there's always this part after work of getting outside, of being in the sun. I work from home. Sometimes I feel trapped in the prison, a little bit of my own home. It's always that part of like getting outside, breathing fresh air, feeling sun on my skin if I hadn't already gotten out to do it in the morning. Um, and, finding a point of reconnection.
Love that. What is something that makes you little kid happy outside of work, but something that just like totally gets you pumped?
I'm a like deep sucker for water. Like I grew up in Arizona and I like lived in a pool. I'm a Pisces. So I feel like anytime that I get to jump in any sort of body of water, that's a pretty gleeful moment for me. And if I can do it naked, all the better.
What is one of the best purchases that you've made under $50?
I really love to cook. I've owned one of these forever, but like a actual juicer for citrus fruits, a handheld juicer.
Yes.
They're like $8 or $9 or whatever else it is. But you really get the bang from your buck for those lemons and limes with that baby. And you just use I'm someone who likes a lot of acid in how I cook. So it's just, I would say that that's an excellent purchase. Can't go wrong.
Totally agree. You don't even know how much you're leaving on the table until you get a
I
juicer and then
know.
it
I know.
changes and it collects the seeds. Like it makes your
I
life
know.
just immensely better. Um, last question, which is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to spend more time like in a rocking chair staring at nature and being a part of an active community in some way, shape, or form, being more connected to the land. What that is, I don't know. Maybe it's owning a retreat center or turning into a shaman or something of those forms. But it's definitely not being glued behind a screen all day long.
I hear you on that one. Allie, this has been such a pleasure. If people are listening, they want to know more, they want to be a part of what you're doing, where can they find you?
Thank you. And I was giggling at your answer. I'm like, you were nervous to talk to me? What are you talking about? It's the other way around. So they can find me in two places. If you're looking for more one-on-one bespoke coaching support, that would be through my coaching and consulting website, which is alliestarkwellness.com, ALLIESTARK wellness.com. And if you are a leader or a manager or a business owner that's looking to be a part of a community, more in a group coaching capacity, more learning and development style of support, that's through my Noria website, which is hellonoria.com. And Noria is spelled Noria.
Fabulous. Again, thank you so much, Secret Ops listeners. Thank you so much for listening or watching us. Please remember to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts or on YouTube. And we will see you next time. Bye.